And welcome back to the show. Looking at recent figures, according to the U.S. Small Business Administration, 20% of startup businesses failed during their first year, 30% they actually failed during their second year, and 50% within the first 5 years of business. Our next guest is a successful strategist in human behavior. She's also an author, a speaker, aiming to help women and entrepreneurs achieve successful goals in their personal and professional lives. She's also worked in the mental health industry for over 20 years. She has helped over 20,000 people manage and also overcome stress and burnout. And joining us now is licensed professional counselor and author, Dr. Stacia Alexander. And Dr. Stacia, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm glad to be here.
Well, glad to have this conversation. I think it comes at a meaningful time because while we are on this other side of the pandemic, all of us will fairly agree, yet and still there's still much work to be done. And when we look, there's some people who in this moment are really still dealing with burnout and stress.
Yes, and it makes sense because so much has changed in the way that we function. And I think people are underestimating that they are experiencing burnout. Like they've never had it to this degree before. So I know a lot of people are shocked and they're trying to push through, but we need to stop and really take a look at what's going on with the workplace setting, with entrepreneurs and employees, even the management. We need to take a look at what's going on.
Yeah, and particularly when we look at management, I think about being a manager, an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is a manager, a leader, and one who literally is trying to lead a business. When we talk about entrepreneurs, they've had a heavy set of things, and particularly, burdens faced during this burnout. During the pandemic.
Right. Things have changed, especially economically. A lot of people have had to regroup. And what I tell people is just because you're successful, it doesn't make you immune to the stressors of actually being successful. So we still deal with fears. We still deal with anxiety, depression. A lot more depression was reported in 2020, higher than any other year when it comes to entrepreneurship. And I should say in the last 10 years. But we try to overcome those or look past those experiences because we got to keep up with the day-to-day operations to make sure that those businesses continue to run. So yeah, they're still having some pretty hard experiences on what they're going through.
And so share with me a little bit about your work, because right now I know that you've got a cohort and also you're trying to really deal with this, emotionality concept.
Yes, thank you for asking about that. So I run a program, it's called the Emotionality of Success Strategy Cohort. And I walk women, I only work with women now. I know guys tend to always say, well, why are you doing that? It's a difference in the energy that people emit when they're in a room. But for right now, I'm working with women and I walk them through the stages of success based on 4 quadrants of life: relationships, professional, self-care, and spiritual. And we really get into the accountability factors of those quadrants in order to help them understand the importance of setting those goals, but also realizing that there is some emotionality behind that. Because our goals don't have feelings. Those goals are still sitting out there, but we have some things that we're struggling with on the back end that could, directly impact how successful we are at reaching those goals. So if we deal with the emotionality of it, then we have a greater likelihood of reaching those goals. That's in that program. And for over 23 years, I've been working as a licensed professional counselor in private practice.
So looking at the pandemic right now and looking at our emotionality, what are you seeing as some common trends and themes for people who are really trying to just navigate through this?
Anxiety. There are higher levels of anxiety that people simply did not, they don't know what anxiety feels like because they've never had it to this degree. But when you're dealing with the lack of sleep and you're more irritable, you're unable to concentrate. When people call me with those symptoms, then I begin teaching them about what anxiety actually looks like, because we tend to look at it only through the eyes of a full-blown panic attack, when there are several layers to anxiety that could change the way that we function day to day.
Yeah. Anxiety is huge. Stress is huge. And, it leads to this thing called, burnout. And when I think about going back to entrepreneurs, a lot of the people that we talk to, particularly in small business, really were wondering whether or not their business would ever float, whether it's going to stay alive, and some unfortunately crashed. But when we look, entrepreneurs really had a lot to deal with. You had the PPP, and some of them never got that. Trying to make ends meet. In this stage of trying to navigate, what do you view as probably some of the best successful tips that you can give for people to navigate as entrepreneurs?
So especially when you're dealing with the burnout, I would tell them to actually set aside some time to recover, like to give them some space uninterrupted where they don't have those obligations to actually rest so that they can restore and recalibrate. I know society tells you that you have to keep digging, 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 but you do need to take a step back. And then you need to be around other people who will hold you accountable for your wellness. Like incorporate that into your routine, because as entrepreneurs, a lot of times we'll step back and just go all out 100% trying to make that business work, which means we isolate from those people who would hold us accountable. And the third thing I would suggest is to get help. Like some people didn't get the PPP loans, but there's other help out there. You may have to, hire other people to do some things that you normally would do without any problems, but now you're having a hard time concentrating. So go ahead and get you some vendors to handle those things to alleviate that pressure that you're under trying to juggle all of the things that are on your plate.
Yeah. And we talk about pressure. A lot of pressure is applied right here. Mental health. Really talk about how we can become sharper. Over the course of this past year, it was something that was really put to the back burner. I think we didn't talk enough about mental health, but we are seeing some signs and some symptoms that maybe we didn't pay particular good attention to a lot of people who are dealing with mental health all throughout this pandemic.
Well, Darren, it's not because we didn't try. I mean, we tried to help. We were telling people that this will not, we won't recover from 2020 in 2021. We're going to have long-term impacts from that experience, and people need to understand that. So with mental health, I tell everyone, incorporate a therapist into your wellness routine, just like you do your physician, your optometrist, your dentist. And then I even tell people you have a stylist, you have someone, a barber that cuts your hair regularly, but you don't have a therapist on your wellness profile. So why is your hairstyle more important than your mental health? Incorporate that into your routine so that it becomes second nature and you won't understand what it's even like to live without that. So burnout, the stress, trying to maintain, certain lifestyles in spite of this global impact, not just in our households, our communities, but globally, we felt the impact of the pandemic, that we need to get that mental health component in there.
But African Americans and communities of color predominantly were the ones who were most adversely affected throughout the course of this pandemic. There's no question about that. But then when you turn around and you flip it on the other side, when you talk about communities of color and particularly African Americans, there is this stigma in terms of dealing with therapy, mental health wellness, and all of that. Are we finding that those barriers are coming down given the fact of the times that we're living in?
Yes, they are coming down. They're coming down because we're having conversations openly on platforms such as yours. They're coming down because you have more clinicians who are of color, and people will get in those counseling sessions and say, you look like me, like you get it. I don't have to explain these things that we do in our household, or even if I don't have to explain it, I don't have to worry about feeling condemned because of it. And the third thing is that mental health is more accessible now. When I started practicing 23 years ago, there were not very many private practices that were available, and there weren't many private practices that were owned by people of color. Now it's easier to find that. We have national databases where you can type in what you want specifically. You want a Christian, you want a Black woman, you want someone that specializes with depression, you want this insurance carrier. There's all kind of parameters that you can pull up on these databases, and it's more accessible. So they can go into the office or they can do it virtually like you and I are doing.
Yeah. And guess what? If somebody doesn't come, they're going to still deal with it at home. I'm going to give you an opportunity to help somebody at home. I'm stressed. I don't know what to do. How do I deal with this? What do you tell them?
I tell them to take a step back, just take a deep breath. I tell them to understand that what they're experiencing is perfectly normal for what is going on in their life. That their human body it's a human body. So we can't expect it to operate at a high level when they're under so much pressure. And then I ask them, what do you want? What is it that you want? What would help you get that peace that you're looking for? So remember, before I talked about accountability, that's what I bring into the counseling sessions. Just helping them navigate what it looks like to get that peace that they're looking for. Because sometimes it's just so much going on in your head, you can't take a step out of the rat race to even come up with any solutions. But having that opportunity to talk and get it out gives you the space to make sense of what you actually need to get that peace in your life.
What's the biggest mistake people are making these days?
Isolating. Isolation. It's isolation. It was forced isolation at the beginning of the pandemic. We've gotten used to not having to deal with people and not having to answer and getting out of the rat race of life. We've gotten used to that. And so that isolation robs us of that human contact. Like, we exchange energy. Every time we're around people, we exchange energy. Hopefully you're around people with positive energy, so that feeds into you. But when you isolate, if you're feeling down, you're just going further and further and further down, and nobody's really around you to say, hey, are you okay? Come on, let's go get something to eat. You know, can I pray for you? Can I call someone for you? Do you need me to bring you something? When you isolate, you don't have those natural things in place to help you stay in a safe space, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. So as we're moving along now, we're talking about business, we're talking about personal, and really trying to navigate both of those right now in a pandemic. What are you finding amongst clients as far as the personal? Because we've been in isolation, and the interpersonal of having to deal with people, as you said, we haven't had to. But a lot of us are coming out, dealing with folk, short-tempered. Our posture is different. Our voice is different. It's a new world.
You called it. You called it. Like, there are some things that are different about us, and we need to acknowledge that. Like, you always hear people say communication is the number one tool you have for relationships. Well, it really is. You need to communicate. Hey, you guys are telling us to come back into the office every day. I don't want to come back into the office. Companies are pulling in mental health, right? And then when you start to get back out, I tell people, pace yourself. Don't try to go back to the same routine, that fast-paced routine that you had before COVID, because you've learned some things about yourself. You realize that rest is good for you. You realize that you do feel better when you have that time to recalibrate. But the other thing, Darren, what we saw in COVID, a lot of people didn't know each other. A lot of people, like couples and families, parents didn't know their kids. They were home with their kids instead of being at school. They realized a lot having to spend more time with them. So we had a lot more family problems that arose during COVID that needs to be addressed. I think we do need to have more programming that highlights how families can recover from going through the quarantine together.
So I'm laughing because I had this conversation with my best friend the other day. I said, man, this COVID thing, people are just finding out who they are.
Right.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and whether or not we want to be honest, there's this false self, there's this true self, and some people have really come to the knowledge of the true self, and the true self was really the false self.
So, right, part of the Emotionality of Success program is the self-care quadrant. And the subdomain is your self-image. Does it truly align with what you project to other people? And if it doesn't, that's what's going to rob you of your peace. So you're right. During COVID, some people just sat back and realized, I'm not that person. Like, what was I even doing? Like, I feel so much better in the space that I'm in. But again, that's that communication, being open with yourself and being open with the other people, because they may not be ready for who you discovered you truly are.
Right, right. So give us some tips as we start to wind down our time together, but give us some tips really on how to deal with this stress that many people are dealing with silently.
Thank you. So I would say to go ahead and incorporate therapy as a part of your wellness program. Like I was saying before, it's like therapy is what you make of it. And if you have been dealing with your stress and your depression and everything by talking to your friends, just think of how much more help you could receive from talking to a skilled clinician. So that's one part of it, therapy. The other part is to give yourself time to rest and recover. You go back out, come back in, give yourself some space to say, okay, this is how I did. I didn't particularly like it. I'm not going to do this anymore. And the third thing is having that accountability person to say, I think you need to take a step back. So you're giving yourself some room to pace yourself, but you also have this person over here who you trust. You're giving them permission to say, I think you need some help, or you're doing a great job. You don't have to be a ship out here alone in the ocean. You need to have those people around you that you trust and who will embrace the authentic you. If you're having a hard time, great. If you're not having a hard time, great. But you do need that in your life.
Yeah. And what do you say to entrepreneurs and those who are in small business right now who literally are, trying to make it and trying to get through this?
They're trying to get through it. I would, you know what, really, Darren? It's the same thing. I tell any entrepreneur, do you have a therapist? Like, of course, I'm a therapist. You think that I'm just going to say everything to them, but it's such a beneficial component to include. But I also tell them to maybe get a solid networking group, a mastermind group, somebody that they can talk to that understands what it means to be an entrepreneur. Because if you're talking to your girlfriend that goes to work every day, her situation is very different. Your guy friend that goes to clock in every day, he gets a direct deposit. His situation is different. He's going to tell you don't have to deal with any of that. When you know in the back of your mind, no, this is it. I'm going to make this work. So then you would get a different energy from somebody who has a business or who has owned a business and would be able to give you some feedback from that direction. So be mindful of who you actually share your frustrations with, because that could go sour real fast.
Yeah. Dr. Stacia Alexander, thank you so much for being with us. Obviously, great conversation, great information. And listen, hopefully we'll have you back.
Thank you. I'd love to come back. I appreciate it.
All right. Dr. Stacia Alexander giving us the latest. And yeah, you got to get your mind right. All right. Take a quick break. Be right back with the Social Justice Forum in a minute.